Welcome to Season 2 of the Simply Dynamic podcast. I'm Jennifer Maiden, co-creator and executive producer of this podcast, and the Assistant Dean of Graduate Studies at Rowan University's Rohr College of Business. Today, I invite you to join our hosts, Joe Devine and Christina Renna, for a discussion with Kate Gibbs, Deputy Director at Engineers Labor Employer Cooperative 825.
Kate Gibbs, thanks for joining us. Kate is the Deputy Director of ELEC 825, and she's been a friend of us for years, for Christine and I. So we're honored you decided to do this with us today, and thanks for being here, and thanks for making the drive down to be part of this.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to talk to you both.
So this is a rebranded podcast, and its second season is now called the Simply Dynamic Podcast, focused on leadership and really people who've become leaders in their field, et cetera, and how they moved up through their transformation. And I think the first thing first is people want to know, what do operating engineers actually do?
Well, I'm glad you asked. Operating engineers are the men and women who operate heavy construction equipment. So everything from cranes, bulldozers, excavators, any of those big, heavy construction equipment that you see, the men and women that I represent are the ones that do that. And so they touch every single part of construction, from what we call horizontal construction, which is infrastructure, water, energy, transportation of all kinds, but also on vertical buildings. So really, we're involved in every single part of construction, but also every single part of our economy because it cuts across so many industries.
Great.
So that leads to the next natural question, which is, how does a 30-something-year-old woman get involved in the operating engineers, especially at such a high level of deputy director?
Well, thank you. Actually, I'm deputy director of the Labor Management Fund,
Right.
Yes.
which is a separate entity. And we have a little bit of a different role than the union. We seek to grow the pie. We are trying to create more opportunities for our contractors and our members. But I got involved with them through political connections. I started my career, I graduated from college in May of 2008 when the economy completely collapsed.
Wow.
There were no jobs. But luckily, I had done internships while I was in college in Trenton, and I had met some public affairs professionals, and they had opportunity for me to go onto a political campaign just for a few months. I was supposed to be there for 3 months and ended up working on campaigns for years and had the opportunity to meet the operating engineers through their political advocacy. They would coordinate with our campaigns and participate in elections. And I met them and worked with them over the years. And so I was finishing up an MBA at Drexel University and had an opportunity to talk to Greg Lalevee, who's the business manager of Local 825. And I had said, that I was looking to get out of campaign life. And they had this new entity, the Labor Management Fund, that they had created. And so after the election, they said, come up for an interview, and offered me a job.
Well, they were lucky to get you, because I always say to Christina, you are outstanding and dynamic of what you do. And I know people
Thank
are
you.
impacted by you. Let me ask you a question about the Labor Management Fund. What is that?
So a labor management fund brings together the two sides, labor and management, which are typically only brought together in what is somewhat an adversarial position to negotiate the collective bargaining agreement, or CBA, which is what all of building trades labor is based on. And so the labor management fund says, well, what's good for our members is likely good for our contractors. And if there are no opportunities to go to work, then we don't even get to the conversation of whether something is going to be union or non-union.
Mm-hmm.
So the Labor Management Fund tries to grow the pie, trying to create more opportunities for our contractors to pursue and our members to go to work. So whether that's promoting good economic development policy that incentivizes responsible investment in our infrastructure, but also having those labor protections to make sure that there's a level playing field for our contractors and our members.
Can you give me an example of what that infrastructure funding might have been in the last 5 years?
Sure. Well, when I first went to the operating engineers in 2014, our major issue was that the New Jersey Transportation Trust Fund was about to go bankrupt. And so that was a huge issue for us that we had to work on. It's actually up for a reauthorization now, but we have focused on bringing funding from the federal government for water infrastructure, beach replenishment, our energy grid, which needs hundreds of billions of dollars of upgrades in order to move forward in any energy generation scenario. So we make sure that we're advocating for good public policy because our members and our contractors and their families live here and work here and are raising their families here. So it has to be both. We have to have opportunities for them, but also make sure that it's good public policy.
So you touch every aspect of infrastructure, period, across the board. And I think the feeling, of course, which is accurate, is that these kinds of infrastructure projects are the backbone of any well-run functioning economy. It brings jobs, it brings growth, development, business growth. It brings all of the things that go into infrastructure investments. Your union, given the breadth, about how many members are there? I mean, considerable.
Yeah, so Local 825 is the only statewide local in New Jersey. And we also have 5 counties in New York, but we have about 8,000 members statewide. And while some of the other trades have more members, it's because of the nature of the work we do. So when you look at a construction site, you might have, 20 carpenters and 50 laborers and only one person in a piece of equipment.
Right.
And so we're proud of the fact that we've been able to grow to the membership numbers we have. When I first started 10 years ago, I just had my 10-year anniversary in January. We were just over 6,000 and we're now at 8,000. So it's quite a bit of growth in that time.
That's great.
When you talk about the public policy landscape, so obviously I'm a part of the South Jersey Chamber of Commerce, and we talk about this often.
You're a part of it?
Yes, I'm a part of a great team at the South Jersey Chamber of Commerce. And we talk about this often, Kate and I, that for years, business and labor were seen as an adversarial relationship between the two. They were at odds. They were fighting each other on public policy measures. And I would say about a decade and a half ago, we saw that shift where we kind of woke up and said, we agree on far more than we disagree on, because at the end of the day, the things your members are building are my members' future headquarters,
Correct.
Where they're going to be bringing business and economic activity and employees. And so talk a little bit more about kind of that. And also when you talk about policy measures, can you elaborate a little bit further on what would be good policy for you?
Absolutely. Well, we've seen, a rise in folks being upset and having concerns about quality of life issues when it comes to development, right? And so we saw that with the Turnpike expansion a few years ago, exit 8A or exit 8 to 6, it became the third hottest commercial real estate market in the country because of that expansion. And there were huge opportunities in warehousing, transportation, logistics. And at the time, there was a lot of pressure on elected officials to bring in jobs and tax rateables because the economy was struggling. Well, we built up, hundreds of thousands of square foot of space for logistics. But if you don't also improve your secondary and tertiary roads, then unfortunately, there's a quality of life issue in the local communities. And then projects that they originally said, we want a tax rateable, we want jobs. Now you have public saying, well, that was all great, but now I can't get my kid to school on time, or I can't get to pick her up from ballet. And so if you don't have adequate energy infrastructure, water infrastructure, and transportation infrastructure, then you can't take advantage of development. And that's just, one example, because we've seen it in real time. What's happened is this pushback from local communities that, yes, I want the economic benefit, but I also want my quality of life. One of the things that, drives me crazy is that Route 130, as a South Jersey girl, Route 130 has been on the state's transportation improvement priority list since before I was born.
Oh.
We have not expanded it. We have not fixed it. And most importantly, those secondary and tertiary roads that intersect, we haven't fixed. And so what happens is these local communities are impacted. And so as policymakers and people that seek to shape policy, we try to advocate to look at it holistically. We want to build the warehouse, but we also want to improve the road and make the intersection better. We want to bring water infrastructure and make sure that that new project is not going to, cause flooding because of less impervious coverage. So do we need a retention basin or whatever those things are? I believe you can't have good economic development without having that infrastructure to support it.
Right. And I'll do you one better. Another example. So you're from Camden, Burlington County area natively. I am from Cumberland County natively. And we feel similar deep in South Jersey with the expansion of Route 55 that's been around and proposed since the 70s. That will probably never happen now due to a series of, environmental
Correct.
concerns that are there, but is desperately needed because as soon as there is an emergency situation with a weather incident in Cape May County,
It's an
there's
evacuation route.
one way in and one way
So
out.
you mean 55 going completely to Cape May?
Absolutely. And that's another example of stunted economic growth in an area of the state where there's so much possibility. Not that the environmental concerns are not valid, they are, and we're not saying they should be ignored. But what comes with the extension of 55 is not just safety bonuses to residents, but also potential enormous economic growth if you could get it done, which does not seem likely.
Correct. And the thing that we're seeing so much now is that there are environmental advocates who make it a false dichotomy, I believe, that you can only have one, you can either protect the environment or you can do things that are good for people and for business, right? And I believe, when did we stop innovating?
Right.
And figuring out, yes, there are environmental realities that we have to take into account, just like financial realities, right? And you have to look at the picture holistically, because something like Route 55 is a safety concern, has been a huge impediment to that part of South Jersey growing, right? And there's a way to do that expansion, and it's going to cost a lot more money. It's going to have to be elevated. All of the utilities that are already existing under those roads will need to be, and so it presents a complicated policy dilemma. But unfortunately, I think sometimes with some of these more complicated policy matters, when it gets too hard, it's like, well, we'll just ignore it. And just because you're not paying attention to it doesn't mean that the problem goes away. Route 130 still needs improvements. Route 55 still needs improvements. There's projects around the state I could rattle off to you that are.
So how do you prioritize those for what you guys lobby for?
Because we're a statewide local and because we work on every type of construction, it gives us a really unique perspective, especially in the energy space, because every single type of energy generation and its distribution and transmission we work on. So we have no incentive to pick one form of generation over another, because as long as we're providing work opportunities for our members, we look at those as, an all of the above kind of scenarios. Same thing with projects around the state. We want our members to go to work. We want good public policy. So as long as those two things, meet the criteria, then we're going to go fight for it. And so it does give us a little bit more flexibility, I think, than some of other organizations that have a smaller geographic footprint or a smaller jurisdictional footprint. We're able to look at this really through a wide lens, because we do touch so many things and in every corner of this state.
So one of the things I noticed that your people work on is the 295 project,
Yes.
right? And then, of course, we had the wall disaster where the wall collapsed.
Yes.
What happens in those kind of scenarios? How do they fund those type of opportunities?
Well, that project is a 25-year project. It's a mix of federal and I think there's some state money in there, but I think it's mostly federal. And that project actually started before I started at the operating engineers. And, I remember sitting at actually a Chamber of Commerce Southern New Jersey meeting with Deb and Kathy, and Rick Hammer at the time, who was DOT commissioner, came in to give an update on the project. And I remember him saying, and by 2020 we'll be here. And I remember thinking, oh my God, like, that's so far away. Right. And here we are, right, in 2024. So
and still far away, by the way, some of it.
Now, transportation projects are, especially one of that magnitude, they're complicated, because not only are you building the actual project, all while they were building that, they still needed connectivity and mobility in that area. So they'd have to build temporary ramps. Cars are going to be passing over. These trucks are going to be. So even though they're temporary, they still have to be sound. Sure. So they're building and demolishing and moving critical pieces of infrastructure to keep the mobility while they're building this multi-phase, multi-decade project. And sometimes there are, in real world practice, things that work on the engineers, and not an operating engineer, but the professional engineer who design things, the people who check things, work on paper, but you can't account for the fact that soil deeper down was sand and was much. It was different than what they had accounted for. And again, everybody has their role in a project. So this isn't to assess blame, but what happened there was really a kind of a freak accident.
Right, got it.
And I know policymakers kind of jumped to try to figure out, well, how do we prevent this from happening again? And unfortunately, a lot of the measures that were proposed would make us feel better, but they wouldn't actually fix what happened there, because it really was kind of a just natural
you can't blame anybody. It's a natural thing that happens. It's just like when you're building a building, you think what's going to be down below, but you don't.
Yeah, and New Jersey has really interesting. We have so many just
different soil.
Geologically, it's a very interesting thing. So, and sometimes there's discussion where somebody operating the equipment will say, well, I know from my years of experience that, according to the equipment manual, it says it can do this, but I know it bottoms out here because I've been doing this for 20 years and it bottoms out here. And so then you have to see, so those things happen. But I think that the collaborative approach to any construction project, there's always going to be risk. There's always going to be environmental disturbances. It's all about figuring out how to minimize those things and move forward.
But at the end of the day, it helps the economy and helps the communities,
Correct.
Right? And that's what people need to look at.
And
There's
quality
some
of life.
inconveniences and quality of life around it, which you spoke about earlier.
So I'm going to switch gears a little bit. We're here on Rowan University's campus, 4-year amazing institution. And there are college-bound students, kids coming up, and maybe some that are not. What would you say to folks about a job in the operating engineers? What does that look like? What do you need to do to be an operating engineer? And how much money can you make doing something like that?
Yeah. I mean, something that we always say in the building trades in general and at our union is that we don't provide jobs, we provide careers. It is a career path. It's an excellent career path that you can raise a family on and put your kids through college one day. That's the goal. But it does take a tremendous amount of education, and it's a non-traditional than education,
Sure.
than an academic education. But our operating engineers have to do 4 to 5 years, depending on the program they're in, of apprenticeship, and the apprenticeship includes classroom training at our training facilities, which we have 2 in our jurisdiction, one right on the New Jersey Turnpike, but also they have to every year that they go from an apprentice year 1 to 2 to 3 to 4, they have to hit a certain amount of hours working on the job under journeyman. And then they have to test out on 5 pieces of equipment before they can become an operating engineer. And then only a small group move forward to become crane operators. They all take basic crane, but it's a small portion of our actual union membership, and they are the most highly paid. When I first started 10 years ago, there was a huge national shortage of qualified crane operators, and we're still in a little bit of jeopardy. We had what they call a dumbbell problem, where there was a cluster of older members retiring and a cluster of new members coming in. But in between, the kind of 10 to 20 year seasoned folks, that was missing. And so part of that growth that I talked about in our union membership was through organizing, making sure that every qualified operator, especially we focused really heavily on crane operators, if you were a good operator, you were going to have an opportunity to come into our union. There is a tremendous demand to get into any union, but especially ours. That process is governed by the federal DOL, and a lot of work was done over the past few decades to make sure that there was more fairness in how union membership was granted, how it was given, that process. And so we have a very strict process where there's a test, an interview, and then those scores get accumulated.
But how do I get to that first? I'm just going to interrupt. How do I get to that? Like I have some friend who wants to become an operating engineer. How do we even get considered to be part of that?
Every other year, we open up apprenticeship in one of our states, either New Jersey or New York, and it's based on market demand. We don't want to organize or bring apprentices in to sit on an out-of-work list or to have our current members sit on an out-of-work list. So number one, we have to look at the market and see what the market can bear. Then once we open up the application period, because of those federal DOL standards, we have to limit the pool. So we'll make 200 to 250 applications available generally. Up until recently, you had to get in line for one of those applications at our training facility. And we always would do them on a Tuesday after a holiday weekend. People would start lining up and camping on our training facility site Thursday and Friday. And we'd get thousands. We have to bring in private security. We have to bring in latrines, porta potties, because they camp out on our site. During COVID, transformed that process into a virtual process where it's an online portal. You're able to sign up ahead of time and put your basic information to create like a login. And then it times out for the first 200 or 250, whatever we set it at. But we get thousands. And then once they get past that application process, they move on to the other portions.
Well, so it's pretty safe to say I'm never going to be able to cap off a building. Is that right? You can be honest, Kate. I'll take that. But my question, which may tie into this, is the physical aspect. To be a crane operator, right, in a high building, you obviously have some limitations as well. For example, do you need perfect vision? What is the rules for that? I'm just curious.
The testing is vigorous and everywhere is different. But in New Jersey, you have to have what is called the NCCO, which is the National Crane Certification. You also have to have a New Jersey state crane license.
Gotcha.
And just because you can run one crane doesn't mean you can run all of them.
Gotcha.
There are some of our members, we call it a work card. When we look them up in our system, we can see what they're qualified on. And some of them have, 7 to 10 different pieces of equipment. I can do a tower crane, a spider crane, a crawler crane. I mean, there's so many different ones. And the testing is rigorous. And again, it's done through the NCCO is kind of the first barrier, and it's done through the federal government. And we have on our training grounds, we have some of the testing sites, and they literally have to use a tower crane to maneuver a tennis ball on a string on top of traffic cones and into bins. Christina actually got to see it because we participate.
She didn't get to do it though, did she?
I didn't even try, Joe. Let's make that clear. I know my boundaries, and I know I would never be able to do it. So we didn't even try.
But we were very happy to host CCSNJ's Summer Institute.
Yes.
Yeah, right. That's right.
And show some of the teachers those opportunities. And so it's very rigorous. So there's medical testing that they have to do to make sure that, they won't have heart failure, because these are 100-ton, 200-ton and more pieces of equipment. And if something happens, it's not just loss of property, it could be loss of life. And depending on where, when you see a tower crane in a very densely populated city and you think, oh my goodness, what if something happened? It's the amount of damage is really
So the operating
scary.
engineers run the crane, but the guys who put the steel on the crane or that rope, they're the riggers? What are they, the steel? What do they do?
So it depends on the site. It depends on every contractor mans their job differently, but usually you have on a tower crane, like you would see in a city, you have to have 2 operators because there's only a certain amount of hours they can do.
Right. And
then you have safety folks who can be laborers. Sometimes the rigging is done through an iron worker. Sometimes it's done with a laborer. Sometimes it's another operating engineer. It just our contractors have a lot of flexibility. And this is something that in New Jersey is different than everywhere in the country. Our trades members and our trade organizations work really hand in glove with our contractor associations, which, as Christina said, in the past and in other places of the country, they look at those as labor and management as adversaries. We've taken the approach that what's good for our contractors is good for our members. And so as long as they're doing it safely and meeting the work conditions that we have in our CBA, we allow the contractors to have that flexibility because they know the job's best. And every job is so different.
That's great.
What percentage of your members are men versus women? And talk a little bit about, candidly, the diversity problem that labor unions have, not just yours. Yeah, but most.
I mean, and the good thing, the encouraging thing is that every labor organization that I know of in New Jersey is making this a real effort to diversify.
A real priority.
Yeah. And so, and again, some more than others. And it's easier for some than others, just depending on the type of work. We actually have always had a little bit more female representation because while, yes, it's physical in the sense that you're in a piece of equipment, it's not the same as carrying something very heavy up a ladder. So there's less physical limitations because you're in a piece of equipment that's doing the heavy lifting. Now, it's still very taxing on the body, but it's less physically kind of differentiating than I would say some of the other trades. But I don't know the exact percentage, but a focus of our organization has been to increase veterans, women, and minorities. Our training center is in the process of becoming a technical college and partnering with academic institutions throughout the state so that our members get credit for the work they do, but also can pursue an associate's degree in construction management or something else. And that academic part gives us a little bit more flexibility from the federal DOL prescribed application process, because in education, you can have goals surrounding diversity. You can't wait and kind of do that with the DOL process. You have to take the top scores.
Gotcha.
And so we have been able to, our most recent classes of apprentices, we had 30 students in our Earn and Learn program, and 7 were identified as non-white. I think 10 of them were women. And so, I mean, I would say we were close to 50%. So our apprentice classes are small. They're 30, 20, 50. I've never heard of a class being bigger than 50. They're usually around 30. So it's going to be little by little. You can't change everything overnight, but we are making real strides. And it was something I think really creative that our business manager endeavored to do by bringing in that academic approach. It gave him that flexibility to make those goals. So, and the other thing, and we've talked about this before, is that the test for any trade is, there are different types of testing that's done, but these are very basic, I would say, nothing higher than 8th grade math. Some basic, being able to read a chart, things like that, which you will need to do whether you're an electrician, a carpenter, an operating engineer. And because it's prescribed by law, we have to take the top scores. And so what's really disappointing is I want every student in New Jersey to graduate. We have a great education system here in New Jersey, and it's very frustrating that we spend a lot of money and have a great education system, but there are kids who graduate and are not able to do 8th grade math. And that's, to me, a real shame. And it's a huge impediment to diversifying the trades further.
So this is not meant to be critical of New Jersey education because it's outstanding. But the question is that there's a high tier of academia for the people who go on to other careers. And the opportunity is, how do we get people to know in the high school level that trades could be great, but here's what you really need to know fundamentally to be able to get into a trade or a trade union. How can we help the education system do that? Because that seems to be one of the lacking things. Like for years, everybody had to go to college, but not everybody enjoys going to college. And we need tradespeople. We need carpenters, electricians, operating engineers. We need all these people.
And you can make a really great living without going into debt while going to school.
So how do we help the education system understand how important that is?
A huge part of it is just the cultural mindset, because for a long time, guidance counselors and parents thought, it became like, well, if you're not good enough to go to college, then you can do this. And that's not the case at all. It's just a different path. So I think there's been a lot of movement kind of culturally and socially of us kind of realizing like, oh, these are really good careers that we shouldn't be discouraging or discounting and giving a stigma around them. Right. But we also do things like, partnering with chambers of commerce, with education institutions. Great. It's part of why we're part of the Summer Institute, as I said. But we also, our training center staff goes to job fairs. They talk to guidance counselors in the schools. We are part of a program called CICD, which is Construction Industry Career Day. All the trades and the union contractors in the state put that annual event on every year, and we support it every year. And it's an opportunity. Any school in New Jersey can come to this event. They sign up as a school, and we have scholarships for transportation if your school district can't afford the bus. And it gives them an opportunity to go to all of the different trades, have booths where the kids can do hands-on learning and hear from apprentices and members in each of the different trades and see those opportunities. So we are making progress, but more needs to be done.
You're a great advocate for that. So I think it's important for people to understand that there are so many other paths in life, right? And not everybody wants to do academia. And boy, these needs of these trades are important for all of us as individuals, but also for our economy as well.
Absolutely.
Kate, thanks for being here today.
Thank you both so much for having me.
I hope you enjoyed that conversation as much as I did. What was your key takeaway from this discussion? Share it on our social media channels at Simply Dynamic Podcast. Next up, in our Fresh Perspective segment, established leaders and early career professionals will share insights and ideas on being a change agent and how to incorporate this approach into your career growth.
As an aspiring change agent, there are a few things I employ. One is the ability to listen to feedback. Whether you want to hear it or not, you have to be able to listen to negative feedback. I know it's hard to hear, nobody wants to hear it, but it is the thing that is going to increase your business skills and get you where you need to go. If you're only listening to when people say good things, you're never going to improve, and you're just going to stay stagnant to where you are. The second thing is surround yourself with those who are smarter than you. Get yourself into a circle of people who are above you professionally or academically, because that's where you want to be in the future. You don't want to stay stagnant, and you want to always keep moving into a positive direction. The third and final thing is that passion will set you apart way more than any resume or cover letter will. Even though your resume may get your foot in the door, your passion is what will keep you there.
Being a change leader isn't always that easy. A lot of people want to be change leaders, but they don't have the skill or the ability to be change leaders. Fortunately, every skill is learned. Some of the key aspects of being a change leader, people already have, but they don't know. Being a visionary is someone who has a clear-cut picture of the future. He or she or they can be able to project that picture into the minds of other people and rally people to follow that picture. Being empathetic. I know a lot of people are empathetic. They have feelings. They have the emotional quotient. Being empathetic as a change leader helps you to understand and address the issues out there. Also, being resilient as a change leader, change doesn't often come easy. We've always heard that saying. And a lot of people always fight that change, or they find it difficult to understand the idea or the picture that you want to bring into their lives. As a change leader, you have to be able to be resilient, because we always have obstacles in our lives. We always have challenges, and to be able to resist those challenges in getting your message out there is very key. Because if you are unable to get to build that resilience and you can't get your message out there, even the change leader gets discouraged.
Core qualities that you have to have if you're going to be a leader and a change agent are: you want to be wise and knowledgeable in your craft. You want to have a hustle mentality with a willingness to put in the effort. You want to be affectionate and friendly with others. And you want to be inspiring and passionate. Some ways that us change agents can handle resistance and motivate others towards new vision would be: don't take no for an answer. If someone gives you much resistance, you have to plow through it like a roadblock. You can't go around it. Don't run from it. Don't go above it, but plow through it. Don't take any no for an answer. Another way is handle it like a negotiation. You want to first find out what people want and need. Then you want to get to know them, understand how they react to things, and then you want to propose a solution that fits for both of you and solves both of your problems. Another way is you want to convince them on a bigger and better vision that will impact and improve more people. So it's not just you and them, you're also doing something better for society or for the company, where they see that and they see that it works towards progress. You want to also make sure that this vision is detailed as possible. The more detailed your vision, the more you're likely to get more people on board. They see it, you want to paint a picture for them, and it just makes everything better. Brian Ekus, real estate broker of Young Realty, co-chair of the Alumni Advisory Council for the Royal College of Business, adjunct professor of real estate and entrepreneurship for the School of Innovation and Entrepreneurship, Rowan MBA alumni 2015.
Ronald Ngwashi, financial analyst at People Assisting the Homeless, Los Angeles, California. Rowan University MBA MS Finance student. Rowan College of Business MBA MS Finance fellow.
Ryan Ems, MBA student, Roar College of Business, founding president of Rowan Students for Sensible Drug Policy.
In each episode of the Simply Dynamic podcast, we like to close out with an action-oriented tip from an expert that you can implement in your workplace. Today's expert advice comes from Paul Litwack. Paul is a consultant and advisor for DTA Partners and is a business builder with over 20 years of experience as CEO of several middle market corporations, and he has over 30 years of experience helping private equity or family-owned corporations shift trajectories and increase shareholder value.
Leadership gets what it will tolerate, or some might say, how do you eliminate 4-year-old behavior? As a serial entrepreneur, I've been running companies that are generally $250 million in sales or less and 500 employees. And 4-year-old behavior is what I call passive dependency. People who come to work late, people who blame others, employees who make excuses for their mistakes, employees expect everyone to tell them what to do, when to do it, and how to do it, employees that want detailed job descriptions, employees that want detailed policies and systems. That passive dependency is like dragging concrete. We need, in smaller businesses, active, interdependent employees who want to get in the game, take a shot, and say, I'd rather be sorry for something I did than what I didn't do. Too often, we've been in the behavioral modification business as leaders. That doesn't work. We can train employees in technical skills, but to change behavior means that you either have to have a frontal lobotomy or 20 years of psychotherapy. Having passive dependent employees is like dragging concrete. So how do you actually find the kind of employees you want? For me, it's a simple motto: hire slowly, fire fast. So we'd be much better off hiring right. And hiring right means taking your time, making sure you understand the candidate's capabilities and their attitudes towards business. And when we do hire right, you will have a company that is moving forward in a very strong way and a very successful opportunity. Paul Litwack, serial entrepreneur, Roar College of Business, executive in residence.
Thank you to all of our guests for joining us today, and thank you, our audience, for listening to the Simply Dynamic podcast. This podcast is a collaborative project led by the Graduate Studies team at Rowan University's Roar College of Business in partnership with our hosts, Joe Devine and Christina Renna, and with support from producer and creative director Keith Brand, a professor in Rowan's radio, television, and film department. Music from this episode came from Epidemic Sound and Renku Corporation, recorded in collaboration with nonprofit partners. To learn more about the Simply Dynamic podcast, visit simplydynamicpodcast.com. Until the next episode, take care, and we look forward to connecting with you again soon.